Hi. There's a lot of things that I've had to give up because of the pandemic and being in quarantine, and things that really make me sad. But one of the things that I haven't had to give up, which I really love, is to run. And I park off of 381, and I work my way across 30 and Old 30, and depending on how far I want to run, I can go in all kinds of directions. But as of late, any way I decide I'm going to go, I always get to this corner, and it's the corner of Thomas and Mountain. For those of you who know me well, you know that I get a lot from words and imagery. It's just a way that I feel like God can really speak to me. So every time I reach this corner, and it's after a big hill, it makes me think of, well, first of all, it makes me think of Thomas. Thomas is one of the chosen original 12 disciples in the Bible. And Thomas was very loyal to Jesus. He walked with him for 3 years. And so you can tell that there was a commitment there, and a love there, and a belief there. Thomas also was very loyal and courageous to Jesus. There's an event where Jesus says that he has to return to a region where he had recently, the people had tried to stone him. And it's Thomas who encourages the reluctant disciples and says, let's go with them. And if we have to die with them, let's do that. That's Thomas. And I get to this corner and I think of him. But I also think of Thomas and remember him maybe the way that you remember him better, as when he got his nickname, Doubting Thomas. You see, after Jesus had been arrested and crucified and died and was buried, the disciples were understandably grieving and confused and full of fear. And the disciples went and they gathered the evening after the first day of Jesus' resurrection in a house behind locked doors. And then all of a sudden, Jesus appears in their midst. And he says, "Peace be with you." And then he goes and he shows them the marks in his hands and the wound on his side. And the disciples are so excited. Here they have witnessed that Jesus has risen. They're so excited that they go and they tell Thomas. And you see, Thomas wasn't there when they were. And I see my hair is sticking up. And Thomas, he wasn't privileged to that experience. And they tell Thomas, "We've seen Jesus. He's alive. He's risen." And Thomas, understandably, again, says, "Unless I see the marks in his hands and put my fingers where the nails were, unless I put my hand in his side, I will not believe." And that's where he gets that nickname, Doubting Thomas. But I understand Thomas. I understand doubt. I understand that when people experience something that I haven't experienced, especially when it could be difficult to get my head around because it seems so big and impossible, I can understand where he is doubting. In James, it has a really good imagery of doubt. In James, it says that the one who doubts is like a wave on the sea, being tossed by the wind. See, I can see that and I can understand that because I've been to the ocean. And I've seen how a wave can just shoot straight up, especially when there's a storm coming on. And it's like the wave goes to the height, and then not even a second, there's like this little mini itsy bitsy pause, and then that wind blows again, and bam, down goes that wave, and it goes to the depths. And it's being tossed up and then down. You know, it's like when somebody says, "Man, it was like being on a roller coaster." That I can understand of doubt. It's like at one moment, I say, yeah, God is God. He can do anything. There's nothing impossible for God. And my belief just shoots straight up. And then it just takes like just a little tiny thought of like, but what if? And then my human mind that can't comprehend things that are beyond my humanity, it goes and it takes me down, only to go back up again and go down again. And that is just being tossed. And that's what doubt is like. Doubting, it's not so much that there is absence of belief. It's like this inner debate of belief and trust. And it just goes on and on. You know, Thomas, he stays with the disciples, and it's recorded in scriptures that a week later, Thomas is with the other disciples, and they're in that same house. They're behind locked doors, and Jesus appears again. Just like the first account, he comes in and he says, "Peace be with you." And then he goes right up to Thomas, and he tells Thomas, "Look, put your fingers in my hand. Put your hand on my side. Do not doubt, only believe." And Thomas, his words that come out, not in doubt, but with such conviction and surety, he says, "My Lord, my God." That's amazing. Thomas, who isn't going to say anything that he doesn't totally believe, out of all four Gospels, it's Thomas, the first one, who calls Jesus God. That's amazing. That's amazing. And so then that nickname of Doubting Thomas just doesn't hold water anymore, because he's Believing Thomas. Believing Thomas. You know, maybe you've found yourself standing at the corner of Thomas and Mountain, because Mountain is something that really has been making me think too. You know, Jesus is familiar with doubts and questions, and he doesn't shy away from them. In fact, he always responds like perfectly to the person and in the right timing. You know, there was a time when the disciples, Jesus gave them this very difficult commandment that he wanted them to follow, and they heard it, and their response was, "Increase our faith." Like, it was huge. It was a mountain kind of thing for them to do. Increase our faith. And Jesus responds, and he says, you know, even if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, like the tiniest seed, a tiny mustard seed amount of faith, you can move a mountain. Now, God can, I'm sure, physically move a mountain, but in that Jewish understanding, a mountain is like a huge, difficult situation, something that seems unmovable, insurmountable. And Jesus says, you know, it's not so much how much faith, is where that faith is directed, where that faith needs to be put on. And if you even just have the tiniest faith in me, mustard seed faith, you know, the impossible can happen. See, Thomas, he's pretty wise. He could be called wise Thomas too, because he did some things that really helped me. One, he was honest. He was honest with the community of believers. He was honest before God. He said, "I'm struggling, I'm doubting." And I get that, because I have those times too, and I do talk to God, and I talk to other people. The other thing he did is that he exercised a seed of faith, because he doubted within community. You know, you can't doubt in community. He hung out with believers. Even when he couldn't believe, he hung out with those who did. And even though he didn't experience exactly what they experienced, he stayed and listened to them share their experience. And because he did that, at the right time, Jesus appeared to him. And then he has his own story and his own way to share with other people. So I guess, again, standing here at the corner of Thomas and Mountain, I hope that you hear this and you can relate to it. And my prayer is that you realize that this is a crossroads, and this can happen. And even if you're not struggling right now about, like, your doubts of how God can get you through this pandemic and how His good can come from it. For me, like my little tiny mustard seed faith means that God keeps His promises. I believe that God keeps His promises. And that little statement of faith, that's what moves me forward. And I don't ever do it alone. I do it with the Lord Himself, the presence of the Holy Spirit, and I do it with all of you, the community of believers. So when we get out of this, and my prayer for you is that, like Thomas, when you're on the other side, or you get a little better view, or in God's grace and mercy, He shows you some incredible blessings, that like Thomas you can say, my Lord, my God. All right, I'm not done running, but I am really thankful because now I get to go downhill. I love you all. All righty, bye-bye.